So I grew up out in the countryside of northern Indiana. This encounter happened when I was in the 7th grade. We had a trash pile where we burned our garbage, and my mom had me take out a bag at like 10 p.m. I grew up in the woods around our house and was not afraid of the dark, so I didn't have any reason to be hallucinating or seeing shapes in the dark as kids do. I had never been afraid of the dark until this point in time. I took the bag out and walked the short distance down the road to our trash pile. I was about to throw our garbage on top before I saw something standing about a car's length from the pile. Whatever this thing was, it was towering over me, and I was tall for someone around my age, being 13. This thing loomed over me. It had to have been over 10 feet tall. We just stared at each other for a long minute, and that is when I noticed that it had dark midnight fur and bright red, almost glowing in the dark eyes. I was frozen. Then it just turned and stomped back into the woods. It was very fast, and to me, the weight of this thing was making the floor of the woods vibrate. I screamed and dropped the bag in the road and ran as fast as I could back to the house. My mother saw that I was acting like I was in shock and I could hardly breathe, and my mom was tuned out most of the time, being too depressed to even notice her children. My state of mind obviously disturbed her enough that she came back to check on me. I told her what had happened, and she let me stay home from school for the rest of the week. Fast forward about 5 years later, I started living with my aunt because my situation with my depressed mother got so bad that I had to move. At this point in time, my mom was too depressed and addicted to all sorts of things. One night, my aunt had some friends of the family over, and I heard a conversation that piqued my interest. My aunt was telling our family friend about seeing a pair of red glowing eyes staring in at her from a 10-foot-high window in her trailer. One of those weird small ones that are toward the top in the bathroom, the same place that I saw that tall man-beast thing. I told her what had happened to me, and her jaw dropped. This was probably the most satisfying thing that had happened to me. Hearing it from another person made my experience feel authentic, and made me think that I wasn't crazy anymore.
This happened to me when I was 15 years old with my brother back in eastern Tennessee. This took place in the early 2000s when my brother and I were in high school. Now as adults, neither one of us live in Tennessee. I was a sophomore in high school at the age of 15, about to turn 16. My brother, on the other hand, was 17, and he was going to be starting his senior year pretty soon. We lived in a small town called Newport in eastern Tennessee. This is going back about 8-9 years, so I'm trying to remember every little detail that I can for this story. So my brother and I were just walking through the woods, as there's really nothing else to do as a teenager in this small town. Sure, there's some places to shop, get some soda, some snacks, things like that. But realistically, we didn't have cars and we didn't have terribly anything to do during the summer. We were always looking for an adventure. I had a bright imagination. Even at the age of 15, my mind would just wander. My older brother, to be in all honesty, was kind of introverted. He didn't really like to be around a lot of people. In fact, that even includes some family members. He's just really a solo type of person. But we've always had a pretty good relationship nonetheless. We'd always try to find something to do when we're bored and sick of playing video games all the time. So this particular time we were out in the woods just goofing around and just exploring with nothing better to do with our time, like I said. Eventually, we made it to the Pigeon River. There was this huge old-school steel train track that went over the Pigeon River. It was quite creepy looking, even in the daytime. The sun was starting to set, but it was still daylight outside. It was on its way to getting dark though, and that was our cue that it was probably time to start heading back home. We were going to start walking up the hill towards the road when we heard something in the distance. It was coming somewhere in the direction of the old metal railroad over there right in front of us, about 60 feet or so, maybe more. It sounded like there was some dogs being attacked or something. So we started to walk in that direction, curious to see what the heck was going on. It was weird because the closer that we got to that metal railway, the more disgusting foul odor filled the air. It smelled like death. It smelled like blood. When we started to make our way underneath that metal railway to the other end, I got a tingle down the back of my spine. It was like my mind was telling me to get the hell out of there, but at the same time, I needed to know. My brother shared the same expression as I had. I could tell he was concerned yet frightened at the same time, as was I. Once we got to the other end, that's when we saw it. There was blood everywhere, in the nearby water, all over the grass and dirt, and along the metal wall from underneath. There, lying on the ground lifeless, seemed to be some kind of big coyote. It looked like a massacre, like something was butchered. I remember covering my mouth, trying to prevent myself from puking. My brother just leaned over, grabbing his knees and inhaling deeply. It was horrifying. As we got closer, we could see what kind of damage this thing actually had taken. It was completely ripped open. Its throat was cut, and its stomach was completely gutted out. You could see its organs and intestines just lying on the dirt. Something brutally murdered this dog. Judging by looking at it, it wasn't like a family-friendly dog. It was some kind of coyote, a wild one, and it was pretty big. It looked pretty ruthless. Even in death, you could tell that thing was a killer. So what attacked it? And literally, it must have just gotten attacked because we heard it screaming and barking and yelping and all that, moments before we even got over there. There was no one else over there. There was no gunshot. There was no footprints. Nothing. This dog was viciously attacked by someone or something, but there was nobody else there but us. That's when I got goosebumps all over my body. I told my brother, let's get the hell out of here and tell somebody. He just nodded his head, and we walked around the crime scene, I guess, and started running up the hill towards the road. As we were running up the hill, right before we got to the road, I turned around just to make sure nothing was following us. And that's when I swore I saw this black silhouetted head thing peeking from around some brush near the metal railway. I don't know what it was. It was too far down for me to really judge who or what it was, but whatever it was, it had glowing eyes.
Alright everyone, so I had a recent encounter with, well, something. I'm not sure what it was, as I never actually saw it, but the encounter seems to be in line with things I've read here and other places. So here it goes. It was approximately 2 weeks ago, just before Halloween. Now, let me start by saying I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking and I've spent countless hours in my city's 16 square mile state park, but I'm not a mountain man by any means. The park is home to several indigenous mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles, and is full of small ponds, thick brush, and even swampy marshes in spots. There are designated hiking and biking trails that sprawl the area, but there are also several wild areas that aren't really maintained or used. Being that I have an adventurous streak, and that I also hate being around groups of people, I often find myself in these less ventured or wild areas. Now, it's worth noting that I've never really felt uncomfortable in this park. It's kind of like my safe place. I go there to get away, decompress after work, or just to be alone sometimes. It feels like a second home in ways. Anyway, enough background information. I'm rambling. I just pulled up to one of the less commonly fished ponds, Beaver Lake, and I intended to circle to the far side, 3/4 mile from my truck, on one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, and then into the tree line, and then push further back onto one of the old horse trails. Now, this horse trail in particular doesn't get used much anymore. I can't say why for sure, but I've heard a myriad of different reasons from different people. Most logical explanation is that it's just not as convenient to get to anymore, and it's pretty marshy when it rains. I'd be able to follow the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 of a mile, but I'd have to fork left off of the trail once it went into the tree line. The gate to the old horse trail was about 500 yards to my 9 o'clock from there, just through an overgrown thicket and up a slight hill. I made my way over the 4-foot gate and started exploring. I had about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have a strict screw the woods at night policy, so I was watching my time. My main goal for this adventure was to snap some pictures of the area for a project I've been working on, and I'll admit I was more distracted than I typically am. Anyways, close to an hour passed. I'd gotten some good shots, and I figured now was a good time for my egress. It'd take me close to 30 minutes to get back to my truck, and I wasn't keen on getting stuck in an unfamiliar area at night. I sat my backpack down on a stump, dropped one knee, and started packing, organizing my stuff. I'm not sure what the catalyst was, but I suddenly felt this terrible sense of dread. I slowly turned and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood up and grabbed my bag. When I took a step forward, a leaf crunched under my boot, and I realized that everything was dead silent. Now, as I said above, I'm not an avid outdoorsman by any means, but I know well enough that silence like that is indication that a predator is nearby, and you need to quickly but calmly make your way out of the area and stay vigilant. It's worth noting that while mountain lions and black bears are not technically indigenous to my area, there have been more than enough caught and relocated for it to be a valid concern. I've been stalked by a mountain lion on one other occasion, and this felt eerily similar, so that was at the forefront of my mind. I'd been moving for probably 5 minutes, and everything honestly seemed fine. I'd lulled myself into believing that I was overreacting, and that everything was okay. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Good, right? Wrong. By this point, the trail was completely overgrown on both sides. I could see fairly clearly behind me and a decent way ahead, but my left and right may as well have been fall-colored walls. I must have gotten lost in thought for a moment because I tripped on a root and ate shit. As I was picking myself up, I started hearing a soft, cooing or chittering off to my right. It sounded like a mix between a dove and the predator. It would start with a coo or yelp, and end with this weird chittering sound. I'm actually sitting here trying to replicate it, and I sound ridiculous. I'm not sure my throat is even capable of recreating it. Anyways, I'm out of shape and there's no way I'm outrunning anything. So I scrambled up, planted my feet, and tried to make myself look as menacing as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look. About 100 yards ahead of me, which would have originally been behind me had I not fallen, so toward where I had taken the pictures and was moving away from, I saw the underbrush start to shake, and it sounded like something was tearing through it. I only had maybe 20 minutes of daylight at this point, and it would take me at least that long to make my way back to my truck. So I did exactly what you're not supposed to do. Naturally, I turned around and I booked it out of there, knowing good and well that I can run for maybe a half mile, 3/4 of a mile if something's trying to kill me, maybe. I could barely hear anything over my own footfalls and the sound of my heart pounding. But whatever it was chasing me through the underbrush, and it was gaining on me. It may have been 15 yards behind me at this point, and I still had a ways to go. I don't know if fear kept me going or what, but I reached deeper and just kept running. My breathing got shallow, my vision started blurring, and I was honestly about to collapse when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me by now, and as soon as I came within arm's reach of the gate, I planted my foot on the bottom rung and launched myself over it. My landing was not graceful. I landed on my right shoulder and tumbled several yards down the hill and into a puddle of muck. I wasn't thinking straight now, and I stood up, shakily, and started making my way towards the tree line and pond. I knew what direction to go, and I didn't even bother finding the hiking trail. I just crashed through the brush and overgrowth like some kind of barbarian. I didn't care about the cuts and scrapes, or the massive amount of noise I was making. My only thought was to get out. The chittering noises had stopped, but I still heard something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. I finally broke through the tree line and could see my truck parked across the pond at the top of the hill. I finally took a deep breath and started slowly walking away from the tree line. The ominous feeling lifted, and I started making my way up the trail alongside the tree line. I was able to catch my breath for about 15 seconds. Then I heard that god-awful cooing and chittering behind me again, and I turned to look back at the tree line behind me. So at that point, there's trail leading into the tree line in front of me, tree line to my right, water to my left, and trail leading alongside the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me. The direction I needed to go was going before I heard the sounds again. The underbrush at the tree line ahead of me started to shake, and fear took over. I'm thankful that my bag is waterproof and that my phone is water resistant, because I jumped into the pond and I swam across. I've never really told this story to anyone in my personal life. They'd probably think I'm crazy, and I doubt they'd consider me credible, especially given my interest in Bigfoot and other cryptids. I don't know what was stalking me that day. I know I wound up cold, wet, and a bit shaken up. I also know I've never been back to that part of the park, and I can't come up with a good explanation. Beaver Lake is off limits to me for a while. I think I'll just continue exploring and hanging out on the slightly more populated side of the park. What do you guys think?
About 5 years ago, I was spending the day with my friends over at the water park in Farmington, Missouri. I guess you can call it a town or a small city, whatever you consider a small city or small town. It's located southeast of the state, just about 75 miles or so from St. Louis. We were at the water park for about 3 hours, and I was kind of getting bored. So was one of my other friends. We eventually all agreed that we were kind of over the water park. Maybe we were just getting too old for it. I don't know. This was a few years ago, and we really wanted to go out and do something. So, one of my friends, Charlie, his dad owned a couple of quads, and he would always let us take him out somewhere. So we ended up just ditching the water park at about 1 o'clock. Dried up, grabbed our things, went back to his place. So eventually we got suited and booted, grabbed the quads, loaded up the truck, and we made our way over to St. Joe State Park. There was some awesome trails in the woods out there that we have been to many times, and it was our favorite place to go. We arrived, parked the truck, unloaded our quads, and we had a great evening. We raced around the open dirt terrains and really just explored the woods and really just had a great time. That place is super awesome. I don't remember exactly what time it was. I know it was after 6 p.m. It was still daylight out, but you could tell it was on its way out. I had an emergency bathroom call, and I had to have my friend hop on the back of my other buddy's quad because there was 3 of us but only 2 quads at that time, and I told him I had to go take a dump. Embarrassing as it was to write this in the story, it's actually quite important, so I had to add this in the story. I apologize if you have a weak stomach, but I had to take a dookie. I had one of those small little packages of Kleenex in my pocket, as I have pretty bad allergies, so I always keep it with me. As my other buddy transitioned over to the other quad, my buddy Charlie said, "It's getting kinda late anyways. We'll meet you back at the truck." I said, "That's fine. Just give me 10 minutes." They made a U-turn in their quad and started racing down the dirtway in the direction to where we had parked the truck. I turned off my quad, left the keys in the ignition, grabbed my Kleenex out of my pocket, and started unbuttoning my pants, walking into the woods trying to find a good place to squat. About a minute or so goes by and I'm handling my business. when I start hearing these weird sounds echoing in the trees. It literally scared the crap out of me. I hurried up and I started rushing to my quad as quickly as possible because I knew at that point I was no longer alone in those woods. I turned on the ignition. Thank God I left the keys in when I went to the bathroom. As I started to accelerate, leaving that area, that's when I noticed something behind me. I turned around. There was some kind of large black silhouette of some glowing-eyed dog man kind of creature. I have no idea what it was, but it was running out of the woods in my direction. I floored it as fast as I could. I almost fell off, not knowing the true power of my friend's quad. It was so horrifying. I was going, God, 45, maybe even 50. I don't know, but this damn black silhouetted dog beast was chasing me. It was coming for me. This thing chased me for a while. I don't know how it was even keeping up with me, but thank God it wasn't as fast as my quad. Eventually, this creature must have given up and turned around or something, because when I looked back again, it was completely gone. It must have went back into the woods. I guess I wasn't worth the effort.
This happened when I was 13, and I'm 37 now. I grew up in a small town about a half hour outside of the city. The town was set in the woods, so we were completely surrounded by forests and rolling hills. It wasn't uncommon to hear of cougars or even bear sightings. As such, I knew how to identify them. Now, while they did happen, they were pretty uncommon, and most people didn't worry about them. I mean, they might happen once every few years, so not really a big deal. The town also had equestrian trails that ran through it for people to ride their horses around. The trails were almost like being in the woods, except you could still see houses on either side of you when you walked or rode through them. Lots of kids took them because there were shortcuts to friends' houses. Now that I laid all that out there, here's my story. I was walking home down one of these trails at night, coming back from a friend's house, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a dog in someone's yard that ended at the trail. No big deal. I continued walking and the thing started to follow me. My attention wasn't really on it for a bit, but then it dawned on me that for it to still be next to me, it must be jumping fences. That's when I stopped to get a good look at what had been following me. It was hard to make out what exactly it was that I saw because it was dark out, but it was on all fours and about 5 feet tall at least. It was about 20 feet away and I could make out that it had red eyes. It wasn't light reflecting off the eyes because there was no light except the moon. I could make out its general shape from the silhouette I could see, and it was shaped more like a dog than a bear, and it was too big to be a mountain lion. Most people at this point probably would have ran away, but I don't know. Something in me couldn't register what I was seeing, and I froze in place, too scared to move. The creature just seemed unnatural to me with how it was shaped and those glowing red eyes. When I stopped, it stopped. Those red eyes were staring right at me, and it slowly started to move in my direction. I tried to run for what good it would have done, but my legs wouldn't move. It took about 2 steps, then stopped and started to sniff the air really loudly. I can still hear that sound when I think about it, and it gives me the chills. Not to mention, this trail I was on was pretty short, maybe 2 football field lengths in total, and between 2 parallel streets. So there was light from street lamps on either end that you could see. Like I said, the creature was sniffing, and then its eyes darted down the trail the way I just came. I followed where it was looking, and I saw another animal come onto the trail at the far end. It was a deer. I could tell by the way it moved, and its shape backlit by the street lamp at that end. The creature that had been coming towards me took off for the deer. The deer must have heard it coming because it began to run as well. I watched for a second, and that's when I saw the creature get up on 2 legs and hop over a chain link fence. That was enough for me, and I took my chance and sprinted the next half-mile home, and this time I stayed on the roads. I never took those back trails at night again, and I never told anyone what I had seen, because they would have thought that I was crazy. No one in town ever mentioned seeing a big dog-like creature either, especially one that can get up on two legs to climb over a fence. The only reason I'm even mentioning this now is because I had stumbled on descriptions of dogmen on the internet, and maybe that's what I had seen. I'm not sure because I never did get a really good look at it. It was about 20 feet away, and it was really dark that night. And plus, it kept in the shadow of a tree that the moon was casting. Really, I only saw a faint silhouette and those red eyes it had. And plus, I caught just a glimpse of it when it jumped the fence. It did look like it was covered in fur, but I turned fast once I had a chance, so maybe that was my imagination. I didn't wait around to see it in the street lamp at that end of the trail either. The feeling of fear had overwhelmed me, and once I had a shot to escape, I took it. Make of this what you will. The overactive imagination of a 13-year-old or a legit sighting. I'm only happy to finally talk about it after all these years.
A few weeks ago, me and a couple of my buddies were camping over at the Black Canyon campground in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We had planned it out probably a week prior to our visit. We like to go camping, it's just kind of our thing, especially now that pretty much we're not even really working anymore. We went during a work week and there was literally like 10, maybe 15 people there max. It was pretty much half empty, if not more. Once we had arrived, we unloaded all of our equipment, set up the tents, and we started to make lunch. After a few beers later, some snacks, and some steaks, we wanted to go on a trail hike. There's a trail on there called Black Canyon Trailhead, and it's really magnificent. We've been on it a couple of times prior. So we're on this trail. It's a pretty nice trail. Like I said, we've been on it before, so we pretty much know the ins and out of it. We're just enjoying the afternoon. It was about 4, maybe 4:30 at the time. By this time, we were already on our way back towards the campground. I don't know exactly where it happened on the trail, but everything just went silent, and the people that we saw from previous seemed to have disappeared. I didn't think anything of it, and neither did my friends. There's different little trails that people veer off of, and maybe they got ahead of us somehow. We did take a break later on in the trail, and we kind of just goofed around for a bit too, so anything could really have happened. Then out of nowhere, somewhere far off in the distance, behind us, we heard the screams. We stopped and turned around, frozen in fright. Holy crap, somebody's been attacked or something, I said. All three of us started running in the direction we swore we heard the screams coming from. That's when we heard the gunshot. At this point, I'm not gonna lie, our running pace slowed quite down. Not only was somebody being attacked or somebody was hurt, but now there's guns involved, and none of us were really even armed other than with some knives that we had on our belts. Probably about a minute or so later, we see this guy running and all frantic in our direction, waving his hands in the air with his gun in his right hand. Normally, you think you would feel pretty threatened by seeing something like this, but when you saw the blood on his shirt, you know that he was the victim. Completely out of breath, about ready to collapse, this guy approaches us, screaming and mumbling, talking about some giant dog that attacked him. His shirt was covered in blood, but the damage was on his back. He had slash marks all over the right shoulder. We grabbed his arms to keep him from collapsing into the dirt as we frantically tried to walk him down the trail as quickly as possible back towards the campsite. And at the same time, one of my friends grabs his cell phone and calls the police for an ambulance to meet us there. The guy was in complete panic mode. He wasn't making any sense when he was trying to communicate with us. All we really got out of it was, "Dogman attack, giant dog," and that was really it. He was just mumbling and kind of talking to himself, shaking all over his body, the blood still gushing out of his shoulder as we tried to apply pressure with one of my towels to try to keep him from bleeding out too much until the ambulance people got there. Eventually, we got back to the campsite about 5, maybe 10 minutes later, and the ambulance was on its way in. Once the ambulance arrived, we waved him down, and they got the guy boarded up inside the back. That's really all I have for this story. The ambulance people just asked us random questions, but primarily their focus was him, not the story. We spoke to some police officers that also were there, and we told them everything that we could. We told them everything that the guy was saying to us, but we didn't see anything. Needless to say, we packed up our camping stuff and we left back home. That whole situation just felt wrong, and there was no way in hell I was staying there that night.
My parents own property in Montana, and I go there often to tend to it, making it a getaway of sorts while helping out. It's about 100 acres, and they have it in this kind of lend-lease program, where ranchers use it to graze their cattle, but the upkeep of fences and watering holes falls on our family. I'll go out there in the summer and camp for a couple of weeks while fixing and mending things. With it being grazing land, it's wide open fields and gentle sloping hills. There are gullies and depressions, though. Anyways, I was out there about 2 years ago mending fences and fixing a water pump that had gone out on the south side of the property. It was getting dark, so I got on my four-wheeler and headed back to my camper. Along the way, I noticed a man off in the distance walking along a ridgeline. This is private property, and the ranchers were on the north side of the property, but maybe someone was out looking for a steer that had gotten away. I decided to head over and see what was up. Maybe I could help since I had my quad, which I did find odd that he wasn't on one or even a horse. By the time I made it up the ridge, which was probably about 200 feet away, the man had gone over the other side, and when I got there and looked over, he was nowhere to be seen. That had me scratching my head because, like I said, it's pretty open country. Well, I didn't think on it very long and went back to my camper. Later that night, I went out to have a smoke. The moon was full and bright, and I happened to look up to the same ridgeline the man had been on earlier. There again was another man, or maybe the same one. He was just standing there looking at who knows what. I watched him until I was done with my smoke, and he never moved. This was strange, and I wanted to know what his business was on my parents' land. So I went and got my rifle I keep with me while I'm out there, in case I come across coyotes or something else while riding around, and I went to go talk to him. The wind was blowing pretty good, and there's nothing to step on except for weeds. So I figure he didn't hear me approaching until I was about 30 feet from him. That's when he turned around, and I got a decent look of him. He was wearing animal furs and was about average height. He saw me and hurried over the ridge again, where I lost sight of him for a moment. I sprinted up the hill, and I'll be damned if I couldn't see him when I got there. He was gone, like he vanished. I was about to turn and go when I noticed something moving in some bushes to my left. I yelled for whatever it was to come out or I'd shoot, thinking that's where this guy had gone to hide. Nothing came out, so I went closer to take a look. As I got closer, I scared out one of the biggest coyotes I'd ever seen, and it took off running away from me. I took a pot shot at it and missed. I cranked the handle on my lever action to load another round, and when I shot again, the thing started to zigzag away until it was out of sight. I've never seen a coyote move like that before, like it was trying to make itself a harder target. I told a couple of buddies the story because it was so strange, and one of them said it was a skinwalker. I looked into that, and maybe, but those are way further south than Montana. I don't know if the natives up here have anything similar. I do know we have a large native population, but I don't personally know any to ask. Anyways, I thought it was an interesting story and might fit with some of the stories you tell. I never did see anything like that again.